Thinking back to your childhood, I'm sure many of you felt jittery or bored, or you maybe even had trouble focusing while you were in school or doing homework. Among other things, there were probably many things you would much rather have been doing in your young mind than any sort of schoolwork. These are normal characteristics that are found in children but are being used as a basis for diagnosing ADHD. I am proposing today that ADHD is overdiagnosed in children. I will begin by explaining why the way to terminate ADHD is ineffective, then how many children are falsely diagnosed with ADHD, and lastly, why overdiagnosing ADHD is dangerous. I will begin by explaining why the way to terminate ADHD is ineffective. ADHD is diagnosed using typical behavior found in children, including jitteriness, boredom, and the inability to focus. The American Psychiatric Association Diagnostic Manual, or the DSM, has been used for the past 19 years to diagnose ADHD. It looks for common indicators including inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity. Dr. Scott Lillienfield has a PhD in psychology and states that in order to accurately diagnose ADHD, a patient must display 6 of the 9 symptoms for more than 6 months. The problem with this is that ADHD is usually, it corresponds with immaturity, and those who are already immature for their age, 6 months is not a long enough time period for them to outgrow these traits. Another problem is that not all doctors use the DSM. Michael Manos, PhD and head of Center for Psychiatrical Behavior Health, says that in a study of 50 pediatric practices, only half of the clinicians follow the DSM. Christopher Lane has a PhD and is a teacher at Northwestern University, states that only 1/4 of pediatricians rely on the DSM. Because this criteria is not enforced, clinicians don't deem it as necessary, and because they're not all following the same criteria, there are a lot of inaccuracies. Another problem is that parents can self-report their child's ADHD. They can then use the ADHD medication to calm a hyperactive child, assuming that their child has ADHD but never actually knowing. Manos explains the prescribe and wait method, which is when a doctor prescribes their child ADHD stimulants, and then if parents don't call to say whether or not it was a success, the doctor will assume that it was and then not follow it with any checkups. Children will then continue on the ADHD medication until the parent decides to stop the prescriptions, but parents aren't doctors. As I discussed, the way determining ADHD is ineffective, I will now address how many are falsely diagnosed. There are more children diagnosed with ADHD than who actually have it. Per region, 5% is a realistic upper limit for those with ADHD. Lillienfield states that in South Virginia, in just the 2nd through 5th grade alone, 8 to 10% of children are on stimulants. This is higher than what the whole region is supposed to be, and this also only shows those who are actually on stimulants, and there could be more that are diagnosed with ADHD that aren't taking the medication. Psychologist Katrin Bruckmuller in 2012 states that 17% of 1,000 mental health professionals mistakenly diagnosed ADHD. ADHD diagnosis is also more common in boys because it's associated with maturity, and boys are known to take longer to mature than girls, so then boys are more diagnosed. Harvard researcher Peter Cohen states that in Virginia, 30% of white boys are diagnosed with ADHD. In the United States, only 1 in 5 boys are diagnosed with ADHD. In comparison, 1 in 11 girls are. There are also more children diagnosed with ADHD over time. Daniel Connors, the professor of psychiatry, states, before 1970, ADHD was rare for school children. Between 1980 and 2007, there was an 8-fold increase in the United States. Dutch pharmacologist William Meyer states that stimulant prescriptions for children in the U.S. rose from 2.8 to 4.4% between 2000 and 2005. People are becoming more accepting of medication curing a lot of their problems, but ADHD stimulants are not to tread lightly. So I just discussed how many children are falsely diagnosed with ADHD, and now I will discuss why overdiagnosing ADHD is dangerous. There are many side effects associated with the stimulants that people take when they are diagnosed with ADHD, but those who are falsely medicated are experiencing them without a reason. Lillienfield states that common side effects include insomnia, weight loss, and slight growth stent. One of my younger brother's friends began as a slightly overweight child, but when she was diagnosed with ADHD medication, she ended up looking as though she had an eating disorder. ADHD acts as an appetite suppressant, and young children who are on this medication don't want to eat, and this can lead to a lot of long-term side effects in the future. Lead singer of Panic at the Disco was diagnosed with ADHD as a child, but stopped taking his medication because it suppressed his personality and his creativity so greatly. Those who are mistakenly diagnosed with ADHD are suppressing their personality without even addressing a concern. ADHD has become an all-encompassing diagnosis as well. According to Lane, the misdiagnosis is given to children who are epileptic, have trouble sleeping, have been traumatized, are highly gifted, have autism, have learning disabilities, schizophrenia, mood disorders, etc. This misdiagnosis is leading to children not getting the help that they need when they need it, and this can be very dangerous depending on the condition and if a solution is resolved in time. For example, highly gifted children and those with learning disabilities are lumped into the same category. Those who are highly gifted are bored in class because they are not challenged enough, while those with learning disabilities can't sit still because they don't understand the material. Neither of these requires an ADHD stimulant. So today I discussed why determining ADHD is ineffective, then how many children are falsely diagnosed with ADHD, and lastly, how overdiagnosing ADHD is dangerous. I propose today that ADHD is overdiagnosed in children. Children are very silly, carefree, playful, and I'm sure there are many young children in your life that love to play, and it is that childlike innocence that makes being a child so special. At best, taking an ADHD stimulant when it is not needed will suppress that silliness, but at worst, this could be a detrimental veil that conceals deep, urgent issues within a child. Thank you.
All right, here we've got a little bit of an inverse of some of the things that I mentioned in earlier speakers. You do have a clear declarative statement as the proposition, and then the secondary claims are all phrased as explanations instead of declarative statements. You're doing the same thing that people were doing before. I'm going to tell you how many people have ADHD. Your argument is that more people, it's overdiagnosed, that excessive numbers of people are diagnosed with ADHD. That's the inference that you want us to draw. So that your secondary point should be stated as a claim, not like a hypothetical question that you're going to answer. It just feels a little bit awkward. That's a minor quibble. Otherwise, I thought that the contents of the speech is excellent. You've got a lot of information, maybe a little too much information, because you're packed with quotes. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff here that you've got in the presentation, and you're having to talk pretty fast to get through it, which means that if people are listening closely and paying attention, you're going to be fine, because we can keep up with the speed that's going on there. It's not that we're going to get lost, but it's going to lose some of the impact that it has because we're not going to be processing it as clearly. And I think at the end of the speech, when you have this, where you do slow down a little bit to kind of make this more interpersonal sort of argument, it feels a little dissonant with the other things that you have done earlier. So, that's just a tonal sort of thing. That's a hard thing to adjust for. Content-wise, I think everything is very good here. Like I said, there's a ton of information. It's cited clearly. You have a variety of statistical information and some examples. A couple of the examples, I think, like the Panic at the Disco guy. Is that Brandon Urie? Okay. Is this his story that he's telling, or is it somebody else saying this? That felt a little bit like it was just kind of dropped in there, and there's one or two other things that are like that. But most of the time, there's the authority that is cited, and I thought that you're fine on that. The problems that come up, there's a long list that you give us at one point of all these potential issues that people are faced with because of the medications that they're taking. And that's one place where maybe a little bit more of the statistical information would be useful. Also, how frequently does this occur in people who are taking these medications? Are these regular sorts of things that people who are epileptic or gifted or autistic and that sort of thing, what's the consequence to them? Does it make their conditions more difficult? Does it prevent them from actively treating the real situation that they have? That kind of thing. And that's another one of those places where an example like the one that you had with the singer would probably work well if we had some other illustration and some sourcing on that. But like I said, those are mostly minor quibbles. I thought the speech was very solid. All right, thank you.